Hi, everyone. It is Kristen and Sam, and we are your custody queens off the clock. For anybody that is new, Sam and I are both certified family law specialists during the day, and we are true crime, passion lovers, analytical thinkers at night. And we just started doing this not too long ago, and we appreciate everyone that's been part of our journey. These are all of our speculations, our opinions. It is based off public information. And then we are taking it from there and putting our own spin. It has all not been confirmed as a matter of truth. We are not here to solve the case. We are not even saying anything is 100% true. We are simply encouraging everyone to think for themselves, think past the headlines, think outside of the box, and to not just believe everything that we are told. This is all for educational and entertainment purposes only. Now, today's episode, we are going to get into the death of apartment 603. So this is a documentary that came out on Hulu not too long ago, and I actually watched it the first time. And if you guys know me, you know I went back and watched it again. But no matter how many times I've watched these episodes and then I started doing my own research, it's a sad case for me. And it's still a very confusing case. Sam?
Yeah. So, this case we're talking about Ellen Greenberg, who is a bright 27-year-old first grade teacher from Philadelphia. In 2011, she was found unalived in her own kitchen. And that was just the start of it. We're going to get more into it, but eventually we find 20 stab wounds, which include to her neck, to her spine, and her back. And some allegations that these were self-inflicted, which, to say the least, doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I think they were even more than allegations. This is like what it started with. We'll get into the step by step. It was her boyfriend that came, to the apartment that they shared together. And he went on the 911 call that we'll have to listen to and play and analyze it together. But he said that, she had to have harmed herself. It kind of just snowballed from there through the entire investigation, if you even want to call it an investigation. I mean, they didn't even send out the investigation team because one person made everybody believe it was self-inflicted. Now, I am not a doctor. I don't claim to be. I am not even a formal criminal investigator, but I can count on one hand how many times someone has stabbed themselves in the back to unalive themselves. And actually, I can't even count on one hand because it's zero. How does that even physically happen?
Yeah, and her death was ruled a suicide, to be clear. But the allegations that somebody could essentially stab themselves that many times, to me, it doesn't pass any test. The investigation, which we'll get into, is concerning to say the least. And this case really, in my mind, still has not been solved.
No, it's a sad one for me. It's confusing. So let's start with who Ellen was. Sam just said she was a first grade teacher. She was a very good friend. She was very close with her parents. She lived in a kind of a cool, trendy town. That was where her and her boyfriend, actually her fiance, where they were residing together. And she had just started the job teaching. And the documentary goes through that she was experiencing some challenges coming with the job. Being a new teacher, I'm assuming some of the challenges with the parents or the admin that come along with it. And graduating from college to moving into a full-time job, it can be a little challenging. But she didn't appear to the rest of the world like her friends that she was really, really struggling emotionally or mentally. But that is something that the documentary pokes holes in.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for everyone to go watch the documentary because it's quite illustrative of the inconsistencies that are really at play in this case. And when you're looking at things and I hear, oh, well, there was mental health issues and there was mental health struggles, I'm not discounting at all that may or was accurate, but I am challenging that having mental health makes you ipso facto suicidal. And even suicidal ideation does not necessarily translate to the actual act of committing that suicide. To me, it is way too quick. It's way too conclusory to just close the book on that and say, if you have a mental health issue and you're found unalive, that equals suicide. That just doesn't catch up to me. Just in kind of going through the documentary, you learn a little bit about who Ellen was and And really, she was loved by all. She had a close group of friends, a very supported family, and she was engaged to be married to her fiance, Sam Goldberg. So, for all intensive purposes, predating her unaliving, she seems pretty like the rest of us, don't you think? I mean, she's going through her life. She's got a job, she's got a loved one, she's got family. She has some struggles, as do we all. I'm not seeing anything that points to I'm going to harm myself, and not just harm myself in that horrific of a way.
And it also, it seems like she's going through a lot of just normal life stages. And honestly, the whole mental health thing, to even try to make the conclusion that because someone was seeing a psychiatrist for a couple months, that they automatically did this to me is so ignorant, and it is so uneducated, and it is so not supported by the actual facts, this case or anything else like it. Being family law attorneys, me and Sam actually deal with people in their worst phase of their life, right? And I would say more than 50% of these people are probably seeing a therapist. I encourage everybody to see a therapist that is going through a custody or a family law case. It is important to have a sounding board and to have someone that is educated and licensed to do that. But to make an assumption because she was going to a psychologist, she had to have done this to herself, to me, is so ignorant. It is just so beyond.
Yeah, and just to kind of give anyone who hasn't seen the documentary leading up to this 911 call, which is really what Kristen and I really want to get into, that this is where everything starts to become bizarre. But leading up to that, you have on January 26th of 2011, Philadelphia was in the middle of a snowstorm. Ellen left work early, went home to the apartment that she lived and shared with Sam. And based on phone records at the time, everything seemed quote unquote normal. And then reportedly, Sam goes to the gym, comes home, finds himself locked out of his apartment. He apparently starts texting her and there's no answer. And then when he comes in, he reportedly, this is his side, says that he found her and called 911. And then we start going through in the documentary, being able to understand what really happened in this 911 call. And this, Kristen, is something I want to ask you about because we broached it a little earlier, but in the 911 call, Sam, who's not to be confused with me because I'm also Sam, but Sam, the fiance, is walking in and on a phone call saying she stabbed herself. What do you think about that?
So before I even get to that, I think, where is this guy's alibi? Okay. He said he went to a gym that was within their apartment, but there's no video footage. I mean, do you have to use a key to get into the gym? Is it a man? I mean, so many questions before I get there. And then he actually broke through the door to get into the apartment because he couldn't get in. And I guess the door was locked from inside, which I've actually done a little research on. I have found that to be rare, but doable under certain circumstances. But the way, when you listen to his voice of him saying she had to have fallen on a knife or she had to have done this while he's on the phone, like, that is not the way I would be responding. If I walked in and saw my husband on the floor in a pool of red stuff, I would not casually be on the phone saying, "Oh, he must have fallen on it. It's self-inflicted. She killed herself. He killed herself." And I think it was a red flag. And
Yeah,
the
I think
history of their relationship was a little, they met, and then he lived, I believe, in Florida, and she actually flew with a friend for the weekend and then hit it off and became, instant lovers. But I don't know. I get red flags from him, from the way that he initially was talking to the police, the 911 call, his alibi can't be matched. I get so many red flags.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we're not accusing anyone of anything. It's odd behavior. I think it's very odd thing to say when you first find a knife and your now deceased girlfriend that you would assume to automatically jump to the fact that she stabbed herself. If I see a knife in my partner and I see 20 stab wounds or a bunch of stab wounds, even if I haven't figured out exactly how many they are at the time, even if I thought that they were struggling with mental health, even if I thought that they may or may not be capable of potentially committing suicide, I wouldn't jump to that conclusion. I would immediately think, who did this? There's no way that somebody could do this to themselves. That would just be my initial reaction. So I think it's quite strange that he has concluded how she died before you even have anyone on the scene.
Yeah, it was almost like it was a precursor for him trying to get other people to fall in line with what he was representing to law enforcement. But yeah, had anybody rolled her over, from the crime scene and noticed that she was stabbed multiple times in the back, because that wasn't even discovered for quite a while. And the way that they called, the company to come and clean, and I think it was called like crime scene cleaning, it was something very, very limited to cleaning up crime scenes, criminal crime scenes. But it was like the uncle wanted to get allegedly pictures. This was Sam's uncle, to get some pictures of the couple for the memorial service. And that is very common, even though I thought it was very, very, very quick. It was only a couple days after they had found the unaliving. But in the Jewish culture, it is very, very normal for that to happen in a very quick time from the passing. So that obviously is not a red flag. But the uncle came in. My understanding is got a couple devices, so that he could get some pictures. The lady that managed the apartment complex basically stood behind him, and he got some things and he left. But prior to him coming, they called the professional cleaning service to come and clean. So at that point, the crime scene has been messed with. The DNA, any of the DNA that was there, is now bleached, and gosh knows what else they do to clean up a crime scene. That's contaminated, but that was crazy to me. But Sam, when you see the blueberries, she's cutting what appears to be fruit, making dinner, right? It was around 4 o'clock, or cooking something. We don't know what meal it was, but she was in the middle of slicing food. So why would somebody that is committed to unaliving themselves, why would they go through that to paint a picture or to illustrate a scene that appears to be someone was cooking something, getting ready, preparing the food, and it is likely that someone came up from behind?
Yeah, I mean, none of it adds up. And I know in the documentary, there's a lot of conversation about the inconsistencies, but also there's some conversation just about the suicide in general and how, sometimes people that are not necessarily always suicidal may, in a moment, become suicidal and do an act that causes them to not like be with us. But in this case, kind of to your point, Kristen, with this sort of elaborate setup of where we found her, it doesn't track to me because this isn't a moment in time. This isn't a split second decision. This is like arguably one of the most horrific ways that you can pass. And to be able to assume that you can self inflict, self inflict, self inflict, self inflict, self inflict. And I've only now said that 5 times, 20 times. It doesn't make sense. It just doesn't at all.
Yeah, and she'd even talked to a couple of her friends that day. And, she had a very, very close knit group with her friends. She was very, very close. She was very close with her parents. They lived a couple hours away from where she was residing. And yes, and I do agree with Sam, the documentary does a decent job of saying that in a flip second, you can have the suicidal ideation to actually do self harm in that very split second. And it doesn't have to be something that's been building up. But from listening to the experts that are speaking on the documentary and a little bit of, doing some underlying research to educate ourselves, because this is something I'm very interested in. Those seem to be more rare incidences than for someone that is obviously it's building up, and then they get to a point where they can't do it anymore. This was like, I think a candle was on, like the microwave door might have been open. There was a knife on the carving board, and I believe it was like blueberries and something else that were already cut and sliced. It was clear that she was trying to prepare something. It just seems so odd.
Right. It doesn't track. 20 stab wounds, some to her back, some to her neck, some to her head, and even on her spinal cord. She's got bruises all over her body, her arms, her abdomen, her legs. And I do think that those bruises likely tell a story. Maybe she was hurt previously, and I don't know by who, but none of this is screaming to me self-harm.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. You stab yourself once, depending where it is, you don't immediately come unalived. But to be able to stab yourself 20 times while you're in horrific, excruciating pain, shock, adrenaline, whatever's taking over, and you're still continuing to be able to do the movement of continuing to stab yourself. That just seems very hard to do. Building up the defense that you're in pain, but your mind is telling you to still continue doing something. I mean, that's a direct conflict with the mind and the body right there. You don't I physically don't even know. I guess you could, if you just put your hand around, I guess you could potentially stab yourself in the spine, but it is crazy. But I agree with you. The bruises are going to be one of the biggest things in this case. And it is crazy that nobody looked at the bruising until Ellen's family hired their own private investigator and team of attorneys to help them, a year later, that it came out that those bruises were in the process of healing. So what does that mean, people? That means that this wasn't done the same night as the unaliving, that these bruises were on her body because they were in different stages of healing and they were different shades of color and size. It was very clear that those were on her body and had been for a period of time.
Yeah, and you may say we all get bruises. Bruises happen, and I think I always have a bruise on me. But the thing is that this goes back to following what the evidence shows, as opposed to completely cutting off and deciding it was suicide by one comment or series of comments that were made. We're trying to look at all the other evidence, and the other evidence doesn't paint this picture that it was self-harm. And then as you go further into the documentary, then you start realizing that I believe it was Dr. Osborne signed an affidavit, who was the medical examiner, saying that he no longer was concluding that the death was a suicide. What do you think about that?
So the fact that he's coming out and he's changing his position, it tells you something, right? It tells you that maybe he looked at further information, maybe he dug a little deeper. And I actually found that the experts that were involved in this documentary were they seemed to be doing a decently job as experts and in their field, but they also were well spoken and they brought up possibilities by also saying, hey, I don't know for sure that this 100% happened. But if you have someone that's coming out and saying initially that this is their conclusion based on what they were told, they're making a conclusion based on what they were told. Okay. And we say this all the time. A therapist can only make an assessment based on information that they are told. So if this therapist, this psychiatrist was told, hey, here are the facts. She was seeing a psychiatrist. She went once or twice. This has been going on the last couple months. I think it was actually like she'd gone 1 or 2 times. She was on an antidepressant. It wasn't anything crazy. It was, something a lot of people struggle with and that are on some sort of form of medication. And I think that he made a conclusion very, very quickly based on what he was being told.
Right. And I think there's sort of two ways to look at it in my mind. The first is, hey, although he was limited in the information that he was given, he quickly came to a conclusion that he shouldn't have came to. And he knows that. And so now he's undoing it. And then the other would be that based on the information he had, he could confidently rule this a suicide, but now he has new information. And so he's not doing that. But the information that at least is shown to us in the documentary, and I don't know, maybe there's other information out there that would change the perception of this, which is always a very big reality. But the information that's provided to me, and I'm no medical examiner, does not give rise to a suicidal finding. It just doesn't for a cause of death. Not everything that was shown in that documentary. I think that most people that are watching this, if you go back and you watch that 603 documentary, I think you're going to have a hard time, although there's no conclusion as to what happened. I think you're going to have a hard time agreeing that it was in fact a suicide.
Yeah, and if you listen to that 911 call, I would recommend listening to it, no joke, like 10 times, because every time you listen to it, you're going to pick something else up. From the tone of his voice, from his breaths in between words, from the words he uses, and when he raises the level of his voice, he doesn't. I mean, he even says that he can't get to feel her chest if it's moving up and down, if she's breathing, because she is wearing something that has a zipper. Well, if you look at it, I mean, it could have been very easily ripped open. It was not something that in a panic you wouldn't be able to get under or to get open. That was actually something that stood out to me very, very, very quickly. It was like, okay, and then you see what she was wearing, and it was basically and it was a thin zipper. I believe it was a zip up. You could have just ripped that thing open. And he made the conclusion very, very quickly that she had done this to herself First, he says she could have fallen on a knife, and then he says she did it to herself with really no supporting facts. But what I find crazier is that when law enforcement came, I don't even know that they completely blocked off the entire crime scene because they never even did a thorough CSI investigation. They
And
didn't, and they say that.
that's really the point here. And I'm really glad you brought that up, because the unfortunate tragedy in this case is that in addition to the horrific nature of Ellen no longer being with us, we also have totally no way to go back and really figure it totally out, right? We can grab little stuff from different areas, but there's so much that was just taken. And I think that I thought about this a lot after watching the documentary, was just like, okay, I get that there are different protocols for a homicide investigation, if it's self-harm, suicide, etc., but there has to be a closer gap between those
I
two.
agree. Especially if you're not certain. Like if there's a possibility that it's one or the other. But because they ruled that, and this is 2, 3, what? Cops, police officers. We don't even know how long they've been on the job. They come and they substantiate the allegation that it was self-harm, self-inflicted. And because that was their conclusion, they don't even send out the investigation team. There was very, very little pictures from the crime scene.
Yeah, and I'll probably say this every day we film. Make a conclusion and force all your facts into it. It appears to be what happened, as opposed to looking at the facts and seeing where it leads you to get to that more appropriate conclusion. But I mean, even in a case like this where there is a scene and there's no real witness to it, you would think that, like, I don't know, is there a second opinion from a different medical examiner out of town, that it is also going to co-sign on this? Like, is there some additional checks and balances that can occur to prevent something like this from happening? And unfortunately, although this case is made headlines and quite tragic, this is not the only case where you have the cause of death being changed later on, the need to go back and look at an investigation again, but not having the real evidence because it's been contaminated, messed with, destroyed, et cetera, before it could even get off the ground. Like, it happens too much.
Does. And this case was from 2011. That's not that long ago, people. It's not. If I would have learned that this was from the 80s or the 90s, okay, it might be a little bit more believable. But I'm sitting there going, okay, there were no cameras in the hallways, is my understanding. And I don't know if there was a camera that would show Sam going in or out of the gym in the apartment. But from everything they keep repeating throughout the documentary is that it wasn't able to be completely confirmed. That's what he said, and I think he was there for like 38 minutes or something. But I'm like, what expertise would allow those law enforcement, those police officers, to make a finding based on just looking at Ellen and what her fiance is saying? What would give them the power, the expertise, the knowledge of making that conclusion on their own? And how was that conclusion even accepted? Like, everything we do as attorneys, everything, our whole part of the way we operate and we work is, what is our position and what are we anticipating the other side is? And we are always CYAing, we're always covering our asses, right? But that's the complete opposite of what's happening here. It was like, cool, we 100% agree with you. It's self-inflicted. Boom. No CSI, no pictures, no collecting the phones. And then the next day, Sam's uncle comes and takes the devices.
And just to kind of make that point, if you slam the door on a conclusion and you slam the door on the cause of death, everything else gets washed away, which is exactly what you would want if it was a homicide. It's exactly what you would want. And there's probably a lot of people out there that are maybe hung up on one little fact where it just, like, they can't get over that to say that it was something other than a suicide. Like, the example to that would be the apartment door. Like, well, it was latched from the inside. Okay, but what if you found out that it's possible that it could be latched from the outside?
Mhm.
What if you found out, I don't think this is a theory, but what if you found out that it wasn't latched at all? I mean, one little thing can change everything. So I just think it's done sloppy, way too fast. And the fact that someone who would theoretically be a person of interest can have someone near to him go in and clean up the spot. It's
Yeah, I
I
agree.
don't really know how to answer that the rest of that sentence, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Sam. And who's always the number one suspect whenever you have a partner of a relationship that is unalived? Who is always the number one person? It is the person that they are in a romantic relationship. Whether or not the evidence supports that or it doesn't, that is the first person any type of investigator or law enforcement, FBI, any of the agencies, that is where they are starting. And if he's saying she unalived herself, it's like they just accepted it. And I really hope that Ellen's parents, they seem like very, very, very intelligent people. I really hope they talk to some legal experts that are attorneys and what their options were for potentially filing some claims against the city and other agencies, because I think this was so egregious from the onset. And I really hope that they have corrected the procedure, like Sam said, when Sam McBride, when you are making that on scene conclusion that there was no reasonable doubt that it was this.
Yeah, and to me, where do we go from here? Well, I think we wait, hopefully, for this case to actually find what I think needs to be its actual conclusion. And I hope also that if but for nothing else, it causes people to stop just trusting immediately if one person who's a human who could make an error, even legitimately assume there's no intentional foul play, could make a call. You as the fiance of your significant other could genuinely believe that to be true, but for that to then be determined to be true without really any other thing to support it causes me very serious concern, and like Kristen always says, is a total red flag. So I think if but for nothing else, it sheds light to the idea that we need to carefully and conservatively go through facts in all of these cases before we decide what happened, because none of us really know what happened. This is all our opinion. Here we are years and years and years later speculating on the breadcrumbs that we've been given from a very, very good documentary, but still we don't have what we would need near to need. And I think that it's just so important, that preservation of evidence.
Yeah, and so if you haven't watched it, please go back, watch it, then come back and we rewatch our show. And it was interesting also to hear that an autopsy was not even done right away. Which, if I'm the police officer and or I'm the person that's leading the investigation and I'm making the conclusion that this was self inflicted, I would love an autopsy that supports that, right? Because then that covers my ass if I'm making that finding. But it wasn't for if it wasn't for her parents for fighting for that and actually really pushing for it, it may never have even gotten done. So we're going to leave you here with this, and we're going to continue analyzing and talking about issues that we see, issues that you guys see, and some theories that people have explored. If you go down the Reddit rabbit hole, that is a tongue twister for me, you will see, and these are all broached in the documentary, there are theories and accusations that there is some corruption within the government entities in Philadelphia. There are theories that this is Sam and his family. There are attorneys on that side that they appear to be at a level where they are affluent and they may have some power or may have some coercion. These theories are actually talked about quite a bit in the documentary as well as outside sources. And we also talk about how it's gone on for so many years, because when high level investigators came on to start poking holes in some of these theories and to really start questioning, you have to remember, guys, they didn't even do a full on investigation in this case because at the scene of the crime, it was deemed as a self inflicted suicide. So it was left. Any overturning of that conclusion was going to open up an entire rabbit.
Yeah, and I got to tell you guys just quickly, I mean, in looking at these theories, I'd encourage you guys to do it too, because of course we cannot vouch for the facts or anything, but a lot of these theories really get your mind thinking about what could have really happened, and are there additional influences? Is there potentially coercion? We don't know, but it really is something that I think you, in order to investigate or look into the entire case, would be prudent to also view or understand.
But what we do know is that Sam's uncle came to the apartment within a couple days of the unalivings and the finding of the body and took a couple devices with him, which they were ultimately returned to law enforcement when they did make the request to actually open things up, which we'll talk about in the next series. But doesn't that give you chills a little bit? Like it was that easy?
The whole case really gives me chills. And yeah, I want to say every part of the case from the 911 call on doesn't sit well with me.
Yeah. So everybody go back, listen to that 911 call, listen to it a few times, leave in the comment, drop in the comment what you thought was the most alarming part of the 911 call and what the red flags were. And we can compare our red flags and your red flags because I'm telling you, we got about 12 from that 3 to 5 minute 911 call.
No doubt we do. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening and watching our show. Please remember to like and subscribe. Like Kristen said, please give us comments. We look at them, we read them, we'll want to respond to them and have them on future shows. So we really appreciate you. Until next time.